90% of the information transmitted to the human brain is visual. Organizations across the globe spend thousands of dollars to create visually pleasing packaging, publication, and logos to attract people to their brand. Teachers can use the same good graphic design techniques in the classroom to get students to engage with what they're learning more. My name is Furman Fortner, and I'm a trainer with SCETV Education. But I'm also a graphic designer, and I want to give teachers 10 graphic design tips that they can use when creating anything they might need design for, whether it be for the virtual classroom or for in-person instruction. This isn't a masterclass in design. You won't suddenly become a professional graphic designer, but you will know how to give a professional touch to anything you make for your students. Our first graphic design tip is to map it out. Just like you'd make a plan for your lesson, you need to make a plan for your design. The first step is figuring out what you want to accomplish. Write out your ideas, come up with what you want to say and how you want to say it, and make a note of things you want to be sure to include, like images and activities. Next, you're going to want to find some inspiration. I like to use sites like Pinterest and Google Images to make mood boards for design projects. I'll find images that inspire me, color palettes I like, and effective ways of accomplishing my end goal. There's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from something, just be sure to make it original and your own. Try making a mood board by finding images that you like, fonts you want to use, and even colors that you want to include in your final design. An easy way to plan out how you want your page to look is by creating a wireframe that maps out where you want your visual elements. Here, I've used blocks as placeholders for my images, simple lines to represent my text, and a simplified visual to represent a timeline. Once you have your plan, you need to start thinking about your layout. And this brings us to our next tip, using visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy in design is the way we arrange all the different elements from a composition to create a visual order depending on their importance. You want to draw the eye to the most important thing on the page and then guide the eye using the following techniques to flow throughout your design. First, we have scale. Your reader is always going to look at the biggest thing on your page first, so scale makes your biggest thing your most important thing. Use scale to make your points clear and allow your readers to identify the most important elements. Next up, we have contrast. Contrast is one of the key elements of art. In simplest terms, the more different something is between light and dark colors, the more something will stand out against the whole. You can use dramatic shifts in color or text size to signal that something is different and grab attention. Finally, we have alignment and position. By aligning your elements in certain ways, you create order and a flow for your reader to follow. You can accomplish this by putting your most important information on the left, since we read from right to left, and at the top, since by default we will start there when nothing else grabs our attention. Our next graphic design tip is fonts have feelings too. A font can impact how you feel when reading something and influence how you interpret a product. Let's talk about the breakdown of fonts. Fonts are broken down into families and then into subfamilies. And while there are a ton of font families out there, for our purposes, we will be talking about script, serif, and sans serif fonts. Serif and sans serif are the main two font families, and they are separated by a clear difference. Serif fonts have embellishments in the form of lines or serifs on the end that vary in weight and make the font easier to read. Because they are easier to read, serif fonts are typically used in the text body. Serif fonts can create a sense of tradition or comfort and are usually associated with a more vintage feel. You can probably infer what a sans serif font is, a font without a serif. Since sans serif fonts are made up of clean, simple strokes and stand out, they are often used on street signs and in headers. Sans serif fonts are typically used to make something seem more modern or sleek and is often used in technology. Last, we have script fonts. Script fonts replicate cursive writing. They can be hard to read, so it's often best not to use them in the body of your text. Script fonts create a feeling of something being more personal, creative, amusing, or being done by hand. Let's take a look at these three logos for the same company. While they all say the same thing, they're each done with a different font. This creates a different feeling for each one. We might infer that the first one, a sans serif font, would be more of a modern coffee shop. The second is a serif font, and since it looks more traditional, I would assume that this is more of a mom and pop kind of place. And the last one is done with a script font. The cursive font kind of gives a feeling that this is more of an artisan coffee shop. Our fourth graphic design tip is using patterns for organization. Patterns and learning go hand in hand. Children learn to recognize patterns at an early age, and it's a concept that is as important to learning as it is design. Patterns create repetition and can be used to enforce ideas and organize content. Here, I've created a table of contents using colors to organize my subjects: blue for math, green for language arts, and red for science. By associating these topics to a color in the table of contents, I can use the same colors later in the design to make the reader recognize what sort of topic we're talking about quickly. As you can see, the heading tabs for each of the activities later in the design correspond with the subject. When deciding on what kind of pattern you want to use, keep in mind your color palette and your visual hierarchy. Symbols can also be used as an effective way of pattern usage. You can use symbols to associate with different types of content. Here, I've created 3 different symbols. It's pretty obvious which each of them represent. We have a pencil to represent that something's a worksheet, a book to represent that something's a reading, and a play button on a screen to represent a video for a student to watch. It is important to remember that no matter what kind of pattern you use, it won't be a pattern unless you remain consistent with it. While symbols are great to use in creating patterns for recognition, symbols are also a huge part of our daily life. This brings us to our next tip. Familiar imagery is used to quickly communicate ideas and concepts without needing any additional information. Take a look at these simple illustrations. What activity do you think they suggest? Since we associate objects or pictures with concepts, it was obvious that the pot meant cooking, the paper, scissors, and glue meant crafts, the microphone and music notes meant singing, and the moon meant sleeping. By using imagery that your reader is familiar with, they will be able to quickly understand your point. Let's say we want to create a simple schedule of events for our student to follow during their school day. We can use a chalkboard to represent instruction time. We can use a plate with a sandwich on it to represent lunchtime. We can use a slide to represent a break or recess, and a book to represent afternoon reading time. Using familiar imagery will make your takeaways more memorable, since people, especially visual learners, typically respond to visual stimulus more often than just reading something or being told something. Using pictures can make a point stick by creating an association, make something more tangible to a reader by illustrating concepts, or using images to make something more enjoyable. It's one thing to talk about a volcano, but another entirely to show one in action. Whenever you use familiar imagery, it's important to remember our 6th graphic design tip: no naked images. We know that using images can be an effective way to make your design more appealing, but how do we use images in an organized way and present them professionally? When I say naked, I'm not referring to the contents of the image. I'm talking about the image in relation to the rest of the design. You never want to just have an image on its own. It can appear to be out of place, random, or messy. When you place an image, it's important to understand why you're using it in the first place and provide context for that image. The easiest way to prevent naked images is through association. A common way this is accomplished is by captioning an image. Think about when you post a photo on social media. You typically provide a caption to provide context to that image. This is easily done in a design by placing text below the photo in a smaller font than your body text to not take attention away from your information or from the body and quickly provide context. Another way to prevent naked images is by aligning an image to other images or to text. Think of your design as a grid. You want to lay out your photos so they appear together as opposed to just dropped on there. Our 7th graphic design tip is keeping labels close to their parts. A common design mistake that may inhibit learning is prioritizing something being neat over something being effective, especially when it comes to simple concepts. In most cases, good design is accessible and efficient and doesn't sacrifice function for form. Let's say we're labeling parts of this cat. We're going to use numbers to point to its ears, whiskers, paws, and tail, and then label those numbers next to the picture. While not a complete design sin, it can be done in an easier, more accessible way. Since this is a simple concept and because we have plenty of room, there is nothing stopping us from labeling the parts directly instead of creating a legend. By placing the descriptive labels next to what they're describing, you're making the information more accessible for readers by focusing attention on one thing at a time. Here we have the ears, whisker, paw, and tail labeled directly. Our 8th graphic design tip is minimizing the need for multiple pages. Let's say I'm your teacher and I'm giving you a choice between a 5-page assignment and a 3-page assignment. Which would you choose? Now, if you were me in school, you would have chosen the 3-page assignment because it was probably less work. But what if I told you the 5-page assignment and the 3-page assignment were the exact same thing, just organized differently? On the 5-page assignment, we have a few paragraphs to read on the first page and then one exercise on each of the following pages. On the 3-page assignment, we have the same few paragraphs to read on the first page and then the same exercises laid out in a way on the following pages so that we fit 2 on each page. It's the same amount of work, but accomplishes the same goal and appears to be less work. Some ways you might accomplish effectively using your space is providing a brief explanation on the same page as the activity so the student doesn't have to flip back and forth. You could also adjust the text layout or font size to fit more information on a single page by using columns or margins more efficiently. You can also play with the scale or given workspace of an activity to make things fit better. By paying close attention to how you lay something out and using your space optimally, you can achieve the same amount of instruction and activity by using less space. During these tips, I've used the word consistent a lot, and that's because it's our 9th graphic design tip. As with most things, consistency is key. By using the same fonts, colors, and similar layouts, you're creating a consistent look across pages of a single design or across every design you make. Consistency creates a way for your reader to quickly identify that the design is from you and makes it so that any established rules like patterns or formats are obvious. This can reduce the time needed to explain things because your reader will be already familiar with the format of the instruction. Consistency will also reduce your time spent designing because you will have a look already established. Think of your design as a brand. You know when you're looking at a Nike shoe, shopping at a Target, using an Apple product, or even ordering a burger at a fast food chain because of a consistent look and feel that the brand has worked on establishing. You are forming a relationship with your reader through your designs, and familiarity is the best way to do that. Try creating a brand guide for yourself. A brand guide is usually something a brand uses to establish what fonts they use, what colors they use, and the way they present products or publications. I've created a sample brand guide here. I've outlined the fonts that I want to use, the colors I want to use, and their associated topics, and some images I want to use in my design. It's also a good idea to create some templates to go with your brand guide. You can do this for pretty much anything you're regularly going to make. You've now learned 9 graphic design tips to give a professional touch to anything that you might design. But there's one last tip that ties them all together. The final graphic design tip is keep it simple. Take a look at these logos from major brands: Apple, Nike, Pepsi, and Target. You can immediately tell exactly what these brands are despite them being simple and not having any words because they are established brands that you're familiar with, making this simple mark effective. As designers, we're taught less is more. You should focus on function over form, and this usually means keeping things simple. The best way to apply this idea is to make sure that every visual element you use has a purpose. There's not an excess of fonts used, color palettes are simple, instructions are clear, and images are effective, and your patterns are well defined. While having a bunch of assets might seem like the way to go, it often confuses your point and negatively impacts the accessibility of your design. Make sure that everything you did has a defined purpose, serves the reader in a positive way, and looks nice. When you get done with the design, ask yourself these 3 simple questions. First, is everything included beneficial to my reader? Second, are all of my fonts legible and accessible? Third, do all my visual elements serve a purpose? If you can check all 3 of those boxes, then your design is most likely simple and it will be effective. Congratulations! You are now one step closer to giving your designs a professional touch. These 10 graphic design tips should be a good starting point in learning about design. If you'd like to learn more from me, whether it be about design or technology in or outside of the classroom, please feel free to visit scetv.org/edtrainingrequest. If you'd like to reach out to me or have any questions, you can contact me by email or by phone. My contact information can be found on screen. I've been Furman Fortner, and I thank you for watching.